Hello! Thank you for agreeing to serve as the table host for the University of Denver's A Community Table Election Edition, and welcome to the short training video. At this point, you should have watched video 1, which was an introduction to a community table. The second video was about facilitating the process, keeping in mind the 3 keys of facilitation: goals, roles, and rules, and the 3 O's: on topic, on time, and opportunity for all to participate from the previous video. This video, number 3, will dive into the content-specific facilitation based on the table host guide. If you have not watched the preceding videos, we recommend that you do that now. Also, make sure to have the 2020 virtual community table host guide nearby for this video. I'm Neda Kirchia, Program Manager of the DU Dialogues program at the University of Denver, one of this year's partner offices. If DU Dialogues sound familiar, well, it should. I work with Thomas Walker, our Director for Inclusion and Equity Education, who was the voice to the second video. Our office is honored to be working on a specific election edition version of DU Grand Challenges, a community table. We've partnered again this year in an online setting, but now with our friends in the Community Plus Values Initiative and the Office of Diversity and Equity and Inclusion to quickly put together content and create the resources for hosts to bring together a small group of people to come together, regroup, process, and reimagine our future. We want to support you all in building spaces for your friends, colleagues, and relatives as we accept the election results and imagine our hopes for the world in 2021. As this divisive election cycle ends, we need space to listen, share, and build community now more than ever. Our focus at DU Dialogues is to build skills and provide opportunities for positive interaction across difference. We do this through dialogue. And in this specific partnership, we had a great time crafting the questions, the facilitation tips, and beyond with the Grand Challenges team, C+V, and ODEI. And I'm really excited to dive into the content details with you now. So in this third of 4 training videos, we'll be focusing on the following: introductions and optional icebreakers, conversation guidelines, the actual conversation prompts themselves, and general tips for facilitating this specific content. The first thing to think through as a host of your own table is what kind of experience do you want people to walk away with? Let your answer be your guiding decision-making compass as you map out the process. Whoa, in retrospect, that was really corny. And that will probably be the extent of corny metaphors in this presentation. But the point is that it is important to be intentional with all aspects of creating this experience. Take ownership of it and have a great time doing it. When you come to your table excited and confident, navigating the virtual piece can be that much easier when those joining you can relax because of your presence. Ultimately, you're having a conversation that matters with people you choose. So let's talk through some tips to get you prepared. You should have listened to the 3 key elements of discussion: goals, roles, and rules. Make sure to bring that understanding and those notes into how you interact and understand this video. Know that you can rewatch any of the videos at any point and as often as you need. So if you need to now, pause me and go back to the second video with Thomas Walker. Take some notes, jot down ideas, and come back to me in a few minutes. No problem. If you're good, let's continue on. Before diving into the content-specific pieces, I want to prompt you to think about your introduction to technology. As people are joining your online conversation through whatever platform you choose, whether that's Zoom, Google Hangouts, Skype, FaceTime, or other avenues, make sure to go over the logistics of that platform for folks as they're settling into the conversation. If you're still deciding on the platform, check out page 4 of the host guide and visit the Grand Challenges website. You'll want to look for the section called Virtual Host Resources with drop-down menus beneath it. When looking over the logistic tech pieces, what this could look like is the following. Let folks know about mute and video settings. So for example, if it's the norm that when people enter your call, they're automatically muted, let them know that. Also, be clear to communicate with people if you expect them to be on video the whole time, and if not, when can they turn off their video. Number 2, Get clear on what can folks do if their technology isn't working. So I want you to think about, are you asking them to turn off their video and turn it back on, to maybe just not do video if they're really having that technology issue and maybe call instead? Or is that directly chatting with you or someone else to troubleshoot? Think through this ahead of time if you're co-hosting a table too, and I recommend deciding how you all want to break up that intro versus the tech pieces as you start off and communicate that early on. And for the third part, go over the functions that you've enabled and that are available on your platform. For example, do you have reaction buttons? When can people use them? Are you going to screen share? Can others screen share? What might that look like, right? So think through and talk about those pieces before going into your table. If some of that is things that you want to talk about with your group, with your table, that's a-okay, but at least have that plan going into it. I also want to ask you, will you enable a whiteboard function on your platform if it's available? Do you need to draw? What does that do? What might that add? What might that take away from? So the bottom line, the more you can communicate about these pieces up front, the less likely you'll have to pause every so often to address tech issues / mismatched expectations. Once you get this set, let's dive into the intros. For your introductions, I'm recommending that you start with these two pieces. 1, start with yourself or your co-hosts, and 2, talk about the goal. For yourself, the goal is not to center the conversation on you, but instead just to share your name, quick background pieces that are relevant to the conversation, and why you decided to do and to host a community table. I think that's really helpful in grounding the conversation, one, for folks who may not know you as a person facilitating the process, but also to actually be explicit of why are you convening this table, right? And that's important to name up front. The second piece of the goal is to actually share the goal of a community table, right? The larger initiative. And I've written that here for you. The goal of the larger initiative is to explore your topic and generate ideas to increase local civic life or involvement around it. That in more detail is explained in video 2. So if you need to pause me for a second here and go back to video 2 and listen to Thomas Walker and how he explains both the goal of the table, but also in explaining what the goal is not. And the last piece here that I want to mention is briefly share why you are all convening as a group, right? What does that mean? What are your goals for today? If it's just to connect, that's okay. But go on ahead and share and briefly share why you're convening as a group. Now we're getting to my bread and butter. So after you introduce 1, yourself and co-hosts, and 2, the goal, it's time to get participants connecting and talking with one another. I highly recommend using a virtual icebreaker to get folks talking when they're introducing themselves. This should be quick, so be cautious in choosing an icebreaker topic so it doesn't take too much of your time. But if you're looking into doing a virtual icebreaker and are nervous about calling it an icebreaker and all the connotations that come with it, just don't call it that. But at the core of it, the point of the icebreakers and the purpose of the activity would be to get people talking to one another, and doing it around a small prompt can help. And I really encourage you to get creative here, hence this background. I think that this is a chance to get people laughing or comfortable with one another before diving in. But at this point, we truly don't know what one another are going through in our day-to-day lives, but we all know we're going through something. So whether that's the larger pandemic issues or other pieces, whether that's being concerned about family, friends, there's a lot going on. And just connecting with one another and seeing each other as people can really go a long way. In the past slide, I listed out an example of 3 kind of buckets to think about with online icebreakers. Those 3 are asking questions, doing an activity, or bringing props. With the asking questions, that can be something as silly or simple as your favorite ice cream flavor and what does that say about you. Another example could be if you had to pick a color that represents your personality, what would that be and why? Or any other kind of questions like that. For doing an activity, that some of these are actually listed on this slide right in front of you, but that could be, for example, bringing a photo that they want to share with the rest of the group. And that photo could be one of the happiest memories they have as a child. It could be a photo that represents a place in the world that they've gone that they're really proud of. Another one could be a place in the world that they really want to go to and why, right? So you're asking them to do an activity before coming. The last one is actually bringing props to the meeting itself. So these can be things like bringing a hat to a meeting, bringing a coffee mug, or things like that, or even bringing your own lunch, right? You can physically bring food. And I really encourage you to do that, right? Especially if you're meeting around a table and the context is food or other pieces like that, you can still have lunch. It's just online, right? The other pieces with the coffee mug and the hat is I wrote here, you give a prompt if needed. I actually really encourage you to give a prompt. So for example, instead of saying bringing a hat, I'd encourage you to say, bring the silliest hat you own, or bring a hat that means a lot to you. For coffee mugs, it could be, what is a mug that is just really getting you through the mornings? Things like that, right? So add those additional prompts that are relevant to your group and that bring you happiness as well, that you're excited to facilitate. After having introduced yourself, the goals, and then introduced an icebreaker to get folks to talk about themselves, the next part that you're going to focus on are conversation guidelines. So with those, remember the past video, so video 2, that the point of this is to set clear expectations for everyone's participation while helping keep the group on topic, on time, and providing an opportunity for everyone to talk and to engage. For this part, you can go back to page 5 of the host guide in the moment to actually have those listed in front of you, but there is a detailed description in video 2, so rewatch and take notes and add anything that might be relevant to your group. For this general part, I am just going to list them out so that you can see them here, but I will not go through them in detail because that is in video 2. So take a moment and look at page 5 where the conversation guidelines are listed. I'm going to give you a little time right now to actually read them or to pause me and go back to video 2 and listen to Thomas Walker talk you through them. So when you're actually facilitating these in the moment, I would recommend explicitly saying why there are conversation guidelines in the first place. How to facilitate these is, like I said, in video 2, so this is the time when hosting your table to bring those skills into practice. As you're talking your table through the guidelines, try to have them visually available, whether that is by dropping the list into the chat, sharing your screen if your platform allows, or adjusting to the technology that you're working with. If you're able to send resources ahead of time, I would send them the conversation guidelines and the upcoming conversation prompts that I'll talk with you about in a moment, with the note that they don't have to do anything with the resources now, but instead to have them pulled up or on them if having the visual would help them participate. Or what you can do is that you can do this in real time. So whether, like I said, that's dropping it in the chat or sending it to them through other avenues, you have options. But make sure to think about that and think that through ahead of actually hosting your table. In addition to talking through the guidelines, like video 2 coaches you on how to do that, I encourage you to have the visual pieces ready or thought through. And that's just a general 1, best practice, and 2, it's easily doable task that can really impact the accessibility of the content, and 3, it really helps too in case you have tech challenges and your voice/video cuts out. So when you're talking, being able to have these pieces ahead of time for folks, it 1, doesn't surprise them, and 2, it's just simpler and easier in the long run. All right, so it's time to talk about the conversation itself. So I'm not going to list out all of the questions on this PowerPoint. Instead, I am going to encourage you to have your guide ready and on page 7 because we're about to dive in. After reviewing the conversation guidelines, next you'll review the prompts and ready your backup questions. First, start by reminding the group of your goal. Then quickly preview all of the 5 main questions. This will help everyone understand the general flow of the conversation and maybe help the group hold questions or save sharing for one of the upcoming table prompts. Start by asking the main questions themselves. We've provided some follow-up questions and points to consider that you can use to help guide the conversation and keep it going when needed. Use what's helpful and relevant to where your conversation is at. While these questions were designed with the flow and in order in mind, let your conversation flow as long as you're staying on topic and keeping to the goal of the conversation. I always tell folks that as a facilitator, I'm here to make the process of talking to one another easier, and that the power of the conversation comes from the ways each person shows up and engages with one another's stories. So encourage people to ask those follow-up questions. And personally, when I do, I always give the caveat that I might rephrase the question or redirect the conversation when needed. With clear communication and expectations, you're ready to dive in. All of the content that you need for the prompts themselves are in the host guide on pages 7, 8, and 9. The way that the prompts and the follow-up questions are organized are as follows. The 5 main questions were intentionally put in that order as a way to scaffold the conversation. The first question is meant to get the group talking about and sharing stories. We started with a question about people's backgrounds and how they've come to better understand their political identity. The second question asks participants to reflect on their current experiences with local or national conversations and parallel issues that are affecting them and their communities. For the third question, we've offered 2 versions. One is specifically for groups or tables associated with DU. We ask how your affiliation to campus has been impacted or might influence your experiences around politics and the election. The second version, 3B, is open to anyone to answer, but with community members in mind. We ask you to prompt the group to think about what they're currently doing to build and or reach community. Another option here is to ask folks what they've heard others that are doing around the country or in other spaces that they want to bring together across lines of difference. The fourth question asks specifically for resources or opportunities people know of or need to have to address personal or societal challenges in taking action or creating change. We've added some guiding prompts to think about these in a few different ways. And the fifth and final question encourages table members to personally come up with an action item they will commit to in order to build or continue to build connections with those around us. In the host guide, the 5 main questions are in blue text bars. Underneath each one are the following questions or the follow-up points that you can use to facilitate your conversation. Go on ahead and pause me now to look through all of that. The 5 main prompts, follow-up questions, and question-specific pro tips or advice are written out for you to reference and return back to. But make sure to plan ahead and map out your conversation. While your plan has to be flexible enough to match where the conversation will naturally go, your role as a facilitator is to make sure you're guiding the process as best you can to meet the goal. Have folks focus on story sharing, speaking from personal experiences, and moving people to action. I encourage you to print out any pages that you may need and make those notes. Highlight what you'll say, star points you want to make sure to do during your table, and ultimately, get comfortable with the content. Having just gone over the prompts for your table, I want to take a moment and go over some general tips. Most of the tips for facilitation are already in video 2. So if you need to, go back to video 2 and make those notes again. I want to add just a few more. 1, it's okay to name that you aren't meant to be the content expert, but are here to guide the process. Even if you are a content expert, the role of a host is to guide the process. So don't omit your voice from the conversation altogether, but do not center it either. The next tip I want to add is it's okay to model sharing if folks seem stuck on a question or if you need to redirect their conversation. And the last one is to give affirmations and make sure to mention that table participants can too. To everyone at the table, if someone has said something powerful and it impacted you, please say so. And know that as a table host, you can set that precedent. You can tell your participants and you can model that yourself. There's also a full list on page 6 of your host guide named Facilitation Tips as reminders for the conversation. Have that on you too. And remember, you got this. So now that you've heard the intention of a community table in video 1, how to facilitate the process in video 2, and now we just went over how to facilitate the actual content, your 4th and final video will be all the logistics and details of hosting your table. Thank you so much for your commitment to this work, and please know that you can watch this video and hear my voice as many times as needed before you host your own table.